The storm outside howled, but inside the farmhouse the boy whispered. Each name he spoke belonged to the living. By morning, they were corpses. Before we continue, subscribe and tell me in the comments, was this prophecy, possession, or something science still can't decode? The year was 1889, and Vermont was a land of contrasts. Its hills rolled gently beneath blankets of snow, dotted with farms clinging to survival in the bitter winters. Life was built around the rhythm of chores and prayer, of lantern light and hand-hewn timber. Communities were small, suspicious of outsiders, and bound together by necessity. If one family lost a harvest, the others stepped in. If one house burned, neighbors rebuilt it nail by nail. But that closeness also meant every secret carried weight, every rumor traveled fast, and every deviation from the expected was treated with uneasy doubt. It was in this world that a boy named Nathaniel, just 11 years old, began to change. He was a slight child, pale from the long winters, with a restless mind that seemed always to drift beyond his family's farm. His mother often said he was born listening to things others could not hear, for Nathaniel had a way of staring into corners as if someone stood there, silent but present. His father, a stern man hardened by fieldwork, brushed it off as childish fancy. But in the winter of 1889, when snow piled high against the windows, Nathaniel's murmurs began to take on a darker shape. The town itself, Cold Hollow, Vermont, was hardly marked on maps. It was a settlement of fewer than 300 souls, built around a modest church and a single-room schoolhouse. The people there valued order. The minister's sermons carried more weight than laws, and the doctor's word was final when it came to health. They had no appetite for the strange currents of spiritualism still drifting through New England. Stories of seances and mediums, once popular in Boston and New York, were considered dangerous here, the kind of thing that gave the devil a foothold. Yet spiritualism was not so distant as the townsfolk liked to believe. Barely 40 years earlier, the Fox sisters in upstate New York had shocked the nation with their claims of speaking to the dead through mysterious knocks and raps. Across New England, seances had become a fad for the wealthy and curious. But in rural towns like Cold Hollow, such talk was dangerous. Whispers of ghosts or spirits were enough to bring accusations of witchcraft or madness, especially when they came from the lips of a child. Nathaniel's family was caught in this storm of belief and denial. His mother, Hannah, a soft-spoken woman with a strong faith, was torn between fear and compassion. She prayed over her son each night, convinced his strange behavior was either a test from God or a punishment for sins unseen. His father, Jonas, leaned harder on discipline. To him, Nathaniel's talk of voices was weakness, a distraction from the real work of survival. In Cold Hollow, survival meant rising before dawn, feeding the animals, cutting firewood, and never letting imagination outweigh responsibility. But imagination seemed to consume Nathaniel. His teacher, Mr. Crane, noticed how the boy's essays wandered into odd territory, describing conversations with long-dead soldiers or recounting details of funerals held decades before his birth. At first, Crane believed it was simply the boy's fertile imagination, something to be steered back toward arithmetic and scripture. Yet even Crane, the town's most skeptical mind, would soon admit that Nathaniel knew things no child could. Outside the family and school, another figure loomed large, Reverend Silas Morton, pastor of the Congregational Church. Morton was a towering man, his voice heavy with the certainty of Scripture. He had little patience for phantoms, which he considered either lies or the work of Satan. To him, Nathaniel's words were dangerous, not just to the boy's soul, but to the fabric of the community. A spark of madness spreads faster than fire in a dry barn, he warned one Sunday. Already, whispers about Nathaniel's behavior had begun to stir unrest among the pews, the only person who seemed willing to watch. Without judgment was Margaret Cole, the town midwife. Margaret was a woman of 50 with sharp eyes and a habit of writing everything down. To her, Nathaniel's behavior was not merely superstition or sickness, but something worth documenting. She carried a small notebook in which she recorded each episode she witnessed, scribbling details by lamplight long after the boy had gone quiet. Her notes, later hidden and forgotten in an attic chest, would become one of the few surviving records of what truly happened that winter. By late January of 1889, the snow was so deep that travel between towns nearly ceased. Families were trapped in their homes, dependent on their woodpiles and larders to last until spring. It was during this long isolation, when the wind howled like a living thing around the eaves, that Nathaniel's whispers grew louder. At first, his family believed he was talking in his sleep, muttering nonsense. But then the words became names. Names of neighbors. Names of the dead. Names of the soon-to-die. And with each name, the boundaries of belief in Cold Hollow began to crack. At first, the family treated Nathaniel's midnight whispers as the ramblings of an overtired child. But the words sharpened. One night, as the wind howled outside, he sat bolt upright in bed and spoke with startling clarity. "Grandmother's brooch lies beneath the hearthstone. She says it belongs to Mother now." The next morning, his mother pulled back the rug in the parlor, pried at a loose stone, and found the tarnished brooch she had thought lost for decades. It was the exact piece her own mother had worn to church, hidden long before Nathaniel was even born. Hannah clutched the object with trembling hands, torn between awe and terror. How could the boy know where it lay? Word spread quietly, carried on the frozen air between neighbors' barns and market stalls. At first, people dismissed it as coincidence. But soon Nathaniel began speaking of things he should never have known. He mentioned debts owed by the blacksmith, debts only recorded in a locked ledger. He muttered about a barn fire that had killed livestock years before his birth, describing the charred beams with precision. When confronted, he swore he had been told these things by voices no one else could hear. A town midwife, Margaret Cole, became the first outsider to witness one of these episodes. Summoned by Hannah on a bitter night in February, she sat at Nathaniel's bedside as he began to whisper again. Margaret leaned close, notebook in hand, as the boy's voice dropped into a rasping tone that was not his own. "Tell Thomas Crane he will find his father's watch behind the false wall in the loft." Thomas Crane, the schoolmaster, scoffed when told of it the next day. But curiosity gnawed at him. That evening, with a lantern in hand, he climbed into his loft and pried at the boards. There, nestled in the dust, was the pocket watch his father had carried during the war, lost for more than 20 years. Crane's skepticism began to falter, though he told no one. He merely added his observations to the notes he kept in careful script, convinced he could someday prove a rational explanation. But Nathaniel's whispers soon crossed a line. One night, he called out names, not of the dead, but of the living. Sarah, John, Ruth. His family froze as he recited them slowly, one by one. By morning, Sarah Whitcomb had taken ill with fever. Within the week, John Miller was crushed in a logging accident. Ruth Abernathy, barely 17, drowned in the icy river under circumstances no one could explain. 3 names. 3 deaths. And a child who had spoken them before they occurred. Margaret, unsettled but unwilling to look away, wrote each incident in her notebook. She recorded the dates, the names, the manner of death. "The boy does not predict," she wrote. "He repeats what is already known." But not to the living. The townsfolk were less careful in their words. They whispered of curses, of God's wrath, of bargains with the devil. Some claimed to hear strange knocks echoing in the rafters of the boy's home at night, single taps in answer to his questions. Others said his eyes seemed to darken when he spoke. As though another presence stared through him, that Reverend Morton's sermons grew harsher. "The devil walks in disguise," he thundered from the pulpit. "He borrows the voices of the dead to ensnare the living." Parents began pulling their children away when Nathaniel passed by in the lane. Farmers made the sign of the cross when they saw him, yet not all turned against him. Some sought him out in secret. A widow asked what her husband had wanted done with the money hidden in their house. A father begged to know whether his son, lost at sea, had found peace. Nathaniel answered each with uncanny detail, his voice shifting to match the tones of the departed. These encounters never reached the church records or town meetings, but they spread quietly, fueling both belief and fear. By late February, the boy had become the most whispered name in Cold Hollow. Children dared each other to glance into his windows. Adults muttered that he should be sent away. But a few, shaken by the accuracy of his revelations, began to wonder, was he a curse or a prophet? Margaret's notes closed one entry with a chilling line. "He is no longer just repeating the past. He is reaching into the future," and with each whispered name, the unease in Cold Hollow deepened into dread. By early March of 1889, Cold Hollow had divided into factions, each with its own explanation for Nathaniel's unsettling gift. What had begun as whispers behind closed doors now spilled into the town square, into church pews, into arguments that fractured friendships of decades. The doctors were the first to claim authority. Dr. Ezra Fletcher, a man of science educated in Boston, dismissed talk of spirits with a sharp shake of his head. To him, Nathaniel was suffering from a kind of nervous affliction, perhaps epilepsy, perhaps a form of madness that struck the young. He prescribed tonics of valerian root and laudanum, urging the family to restrain the boy during his fits. Fletcher wrote to colleagues in Montpelier, hoping for guidance, but received only puzzled replies. None had ever heard of a child whose delusions aligned so precisely with hidden truths. Meanwhile, Reverend Morton thundered from the pulpit. He warned that the devil wore many masks, and that Nathaniel was in danger of becoming a vessel for corruption. When a child's mouth speaks words too old for his years, too sharp for his tongue, we must ask, whose voice is it truly? He bellowed one Sunday. His sermons grew so fierce that mothers clutched their children tighter, and men left the church muttering. To Morton, the matter was clear. Nathaniel required purification, an exorcism if necessary. Better to risk a boy's body than lose an entire town's soul. Yet not everyone accepted these explanations. Among the townsfolk were those touched by grief, men and women who had buried loved ones too soon. To them, Nathaniel was not a threat, but a bridge, fragile, miraculous, and terrifying. Mrs. Lydia Harper, who had lost 2 sons to diphtheria, wept openly when Nathaniel described their favorite hiding spot by the old mill. "He could not have known," she whispered, clinging to the hope that her boy's voices lingered in her son's trembling lips. For Lydia and others like her, Nathaniel's gift was a blessing, proof that the dead were not so far away. The schoolmaster, Thomas Crane, remained torn. A man of rational thought, he had documented Nathaniel's revelations in his notebooks, each cross-referenced with dates and witness names. He wanted to believe it was all explainable. Keen observation, fragments of overheard gossip, tricks of memory. But each new incident stretched reason thinner. When Nathaniel described the hidden location of Crane's father's war watch, something even Crane himself had long forgotten, the schoolmaster could not deny what he saw. Still, he clung to the hope that further documentation would reveal a logical cause. The clash of explanations did not remain academic. It seeped into everyday life, dividing neighbors. Some brought offerings to Nathaniel's family in secret, hoping for messages from their dead. Others shunned them, leaving baskets of food at the edge of the farm, as though fearing contagion. Children were forbidden to play with Nathaniel, though some dared each other to knock on his door, only to run screaming when he appeared in the window. By mid-March, the town council could no longer ignore the unrest. Whispers had turned to outright accusations that Nathaniel was a fraud coached by his parents, that he was a tool of Satan, that he was a danger to the community. Meetings were called, tempers flared, and still the boys' whispers continued. Then came the incident that hardened opinion. Nathaniel, pale and fevered, declared in a voice not his own, "The bell will toll for Joseph Ward before the week's end." Joseph was a strong, healthy farmer, laughing off the prediction as nonsense. But 5 days later, as he chopped timber, the bell tolled over Cold Hollow, struck to summon neighbors after Ward's body was found beneath a fallen tree. The town could no longer look away. Doctors renewed their calls for confinement, for sedatives and restraints. Reverend Morton demanded a cleansing ritual in the church cellar. Believers pressed for Nathaniel to be protected, even honored as a child prophet. And in the center of it all stood Hannah, torn between faith and fear, clutching her son as if her arms alone could shield him from the world's fury. Margaret Cole, ever the observer, summed up the chaos in her notebook. He has become the mirror in which each man sees what he most fears: madness, sin, or hope. And now they will decide what to do with him. The stage was set. A plan would be made, one that could not end without tragedy. On the evening of March 21st, 1889, a storm rolled down from the Green Mountains. Snow whipped across the fields, rattling shutters and burying roads in drifts. Lanterns flickered along the path to the Congregational Church, where the townsfolk had gathered in secret. The cellar beneath the sanctuary smelled of damp stone and candle smoke. It was here that Reverend Morton had declared the matter would be settled once, and for all Nathaniel was brought in by his father, bundled in a heavy coat, his small frame shivering. His mother clung to his hand, her eyes red from weeping. Margaret Cole followed close behind, notebook hidden beneath her shawl. Dr. Fletcher stood with a vial of laudanum in his pocket, insisting that sedation might spare the boy's nerves. And at the edge of the crowd, Thomas Crane, the schoolmaster, clutched his journal, determined to record what happened. The cellar door closed with a heavy thud. The Reverend lifted his hands. "We are here to drive out deception," he declared. "If this child speaks with angels, then let God show his favor. If he is a vessel of darkness, then we shall end it tonight." Nathaniel said nothing at first. He sat quietly on a wooden chair, pale in the candlelight, eyes fixed on the stone wall as if he saw something beyond it. The storm raged above, wind moaning through the rafters. Minutes passed in uneasy silence. Some muttered prayers, others shifted on their feet. Then the boy's lips parted. A whisper slipped out, faint at first, then louder, layered with a tone too deep for his throat. "You bring me here as though I were a beast. But you have called me before, Silas Morton. You called me when your brother hanged himself. Do you not remember?" Gasps filled the cellar. The Reverend staggered back, his face pale. His brother's death had been a family secret, spoken of only in hushed tones. Hannah clutched Nathaniel's shoulders, begging him to stop, but his eyes had glazed over. Unseeing, the voice shifted. "Dr. Fletcher, the bottle you keep by your bed. Your wife drinks from it when you are away. She is weaker now than you know." The doctor's face tightened, fury flashing in his eyes. He reached for the boy, but was held back by others. Again the tone changed. "Margaret Cole, you were there when Ruth Abernathy drowned. You heard her final words. Do you wish me to repeat them?" The midwife froze, her knuckles white around her notebook. No one else had known she was at the riverbank that night. Each voice struck like a hammer, exposing secrets, tearing open wounds. The crowd shifted uneasily, half horrified, half transfixed. Hannah wept openly, pleading for mercy. Jonas, rigid as stone, held his son steady. Then Nathaniel's head tilted back. In a voice that echoed as if from the rafters themselves, he began to recite names. One after another, he spoke the names of those gathered, and with each, a manner of death. Frost shall take Samuel Barker. Fire shall claim Lydia Harper. The river waits for Thomas Crane. The cellar shook with fear. Some shouted for silence, others prayed aloud, and still the boy's voice rolled on. His small body trembled, sweat beading on his brow, yet the torrent of words did not cease. Finally, with a sudden gasp, he cried out, "The bell tolls for all. They are not gone, only waiting." And his body went limp, collapsing against his mother's arms. For a moment, only the storm outside could be heard. Reverend Morton, pale and trembling, declared it the work of evil. He insisted the boy be confined, his mouth sealed against further blasphemy. Dr. Fletcher, shaken, muttered about seizures, though his voice quavered. Margaret Cole scribbled frantically, her candle flickering as if it too feared the words. But it was Thomas Crane, the skeptic, who felt the weight most. For as Nathaniel had spoken, Crane had heard his own name, paired with the icy river. His rational mind rebelled, yet the image of dark waters pulling him under clung to him like frost. That night, Nathaniel was carried home, feverish and near unconscious. The town was left divided, terrified, and uncertain. Some believed a demon had spoken through the child. Others whispered that the dead had used him as a vessel, desperate to be heard. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. The boy had revealed more than anyone wanted known. And Cold Hollow would never be the same again. The night in the church cellar left Cold Hollow shaken to its core. In the days that followed, townsfolk spoke in hushed voices, glancing over their shoulders as though the boy's whispers might still linger in the air. No one wished to admit what they had seen, yet no one could forget it. Fear had taken root, and fear demanded order. Reverend Morton acted first. From his pulpit the following Sunday, he declared the matter closed. "The devil sought a vessel among us," he thundered, "and by God's mercy, the vessel has been broken." He insisted that Nathaniel's words were lies, deceptions meant to divide the faithful. To repeat them, Morton warned, was to invite damnation. Parishioners nodded, some in agreement, others in fear. Few dared to contradict him. Dr. Fletcher followed suit, filing an official report that Nathaniel suffered from a nervous affliction leading to fits of delirium. He explained the boy's uncanny knowledge as coincidence, suggestion, or fabrication by those too eager for mystery. His report was copied into town records, neat lines of ink that reduced weeks of terror into the language of illness. When families protested, pointing to predictions too precise to dismiss, Fletcher reminded them of the dangers of hysteria, of how easily frightened minds could misinterpret a child's ramblings. Meanwhile, documents began to vanish. Margaret Cole's detailed notes, though carefully hidden, were sought by men sent quietly from the council. She refused to hand them over, keeping them tucked in her chest beneath layers of linen. But other records were not so lucky. The church minutes for March were rewritten, lines struck out with fresh ink. A newspaper reporter who had traveled from Montpelier, curious about the rumors, returned home empty-handed after being warned that the story is over and done. For Nathaniel's family, the cover-up was both a shield and a prison. Jonas accepted the doctor's words, insisting his son had been weak, his mind clouded. Hannah, however, remained unconvinced. She heard her boy still muttering in his fever dreams, repeating names in the same strange voices. To protect him, she stopped allowing neighbors into their home. What had once been a place of curiosity became a house marked by silence. The final act of suppression came when Nathaniel himself grew ill. In early April, he collapsed during chores, burning with fever. Despite the doctor's visits and his mother's prayers, the boy weakened steadily. By the month's end, he was gone. The death certificate listed respiratory failure due to pneumonia. The truth, however, remained more complicated. Some whispered he had been given too much laudanum. Others muttered of divine punishment. A few insisted he had been smothered, silenced before his voices could speak again. His burial was hurried, held at dawn with few in attendance. Unlike other graves, Nathaniel's was left unmarked, no headstone to record his name. Reverend Morton claimed it was to prevent superstitious pilgrims, but many believed it was meant to erase him entirely from memory. Without a marker, the boy who spoke to the dead would be swallowed by the earth as though he had never lived in the months that followed. The town worked hard to return to normalcy. Farmers plowed their fields, children played by the river, and Sunday sermons returned to the safe rhythms of Scripture. Yet beneath the surface, unease lingered. Some families moved away quietly. Others carried the weight of secrets Nathaniel had revealed, unable to forget the words he had spoken in the cellar. Margaret Cole, ever defiant, continued to guard her notes. "The truth will outlive them all," she wrote in her final entry that spring. Her prediction, like Nathaniel's own, would one day prove true. Cold Hollow had chosen silence, but silence is never permanent. Decades passed. The people of Cold Hollow grew old, their memories fading with the seasons. By the early 20th century, few dared to mention the boy who had spoken to the dead. Without a headstone, his grave was lost among the pines, and his name seldom crossed the lips of those who remembered. The silence held until one winter afternoon in 1924, when workers renovating the Cole farmhouse discovered a chest in the attic. Inside lay a stack of notebooks wrapped in linen. They belonged to Margaret Cole, the midwife who had witnessed Nathaniel's strange episodes. Her careful script filled page after page, each dated, each describing in chilling detail the whispers, the predictions, the secrets torn from Cold Hollow's heart. She had hidden them, fearing they would be destroyed, and in doing so, preserved a record the town had tried to erase. The notebooks caused quiet ripples among those who read them. Some dismissed them as exaggeration, the fancies of a woman too close to grief. But others recognized names, dates, and events that matched public records with unsettling accuracy. The drowning of Ruth Abernathy, the timber accident that killed Joseph Ward, even the Reverend's long-buried family scandal. Margaret had written it all down, decades before the memories had faded. As the years wore on, researchers and folklorists stumbled across her writings. Some psychologists suggested Nathaniel suffered from a rare condition, perhaps schizophrenia, perhaps cryptomnesia, an unconscious recall of details he had overheard. Skeptics argued that coincidence and hysteria explained the rest. Yet no one could account for the boy's knowledge of hidden objects, or his predictions of deaths before they occurred. Paranormal investigators, however, called it one of the strongest cases of spirit communication in New England. They pointed to the accuracy of Margaret's notes, the corroborating testimonies in scattered family letters, the eerie pattern of suppressed records. To them, Nathaniel was not a mad child, but a vessel, a rare voice between the living and the dead. Even now, Cold Hollow bears traces of the story. Locals speak of strange sounds near the church cellar when storms roll in. Hikers claim to hear a child's voice in the wind, whispering names they cannot place. And though the boy's grave was never marked, some say the earth itself remembers where he lies. The truth may never be known. Was Nathaniel a sick child, a clever fraud, or something far beyond human explanation? Did he carry the voices of the dead, or did his own mind conjure shadows that became reality? Over a century later, science still has no clear answer. What we do know is this: when Cold Hollow faced the unexplainable, they chose silence. They buried their fear, their guilt, and their prophet beneath snow and soil. And yet, Through Margaret Cole's stubborn pen, the whisper survived. Perhaps the most chilling lesson is not whether the boy spoke with the dead, but how quickly the living will silence what they fear not. So what do you think? Was Nathaniel cursed, gifted, or something that defies science itself? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more forgotten mysteries like this one, make sure to subscribe, because next time we'll uncover another story the world tried to forget.